Hello, everyone, and welcome back for day 2. We are in the pharma and biotech track, and this is Forum B. If you are new today or forgot from yesterday, my name is Morgan, and I will be hosting, guiding us through the day. If you have questions during the talk, please use the Brella app, and then at the end of each talk, we will project them on the screens, and the speakers will answer your questions that way. And if you have any other questions throughout the day, don't hesitate to find me. Okay, without any further ado, our first presenter today is Michele Bennett from Avanade. And her talk is entitled Using Artificial Intelligence in Clinical Research, Use Cases and Implications, the Promise, Challenges, and Potential. Please welcome Michele.
Thank you and good morning. We're going to go quickly because I have a lot of material to share, but certainly if you have any other questions, please ask them. But we're also out on the floor, and I'm happy to discuss further anything of interest that you find. When we think of healthcare, human life sciences, we realize that it's a very complex space of interconnectivity, intertwined constituents, but not necessarily always in the same mindset. So that's some of the challenges that we'll face as we bring more advanced analytics and AI into healthcare and life sciences. Specifically in around medicine and clinical research, people are living longer. So the need for drugs continues to rise. It's estimated that by 2050, more than 2 billion people will be over the age of 65. And then, so the combination of therapies has also increased, especially in oncology, immunosuppressants, dermatologics, and vaccines. Today, the practice of medicine is mostly empirical, relying on big patterns, past patient histories, physicians' experiences, and common prescribing. However, as we move to medicine and a mandate inside of our industry for patient-centered medicine, we seek to empower patients by encouraging them to understand their disease more fully so that they can actively participate in their treatment. And precision medicine aims to not treat patients in an all-in-one, one-size-fits-all fashion, but targeted populations, genomics, biomarkers, lifestyle, and as well as traditional medical data. So the goal of precision medicine and patient-centered medicine really do align with advanced analytics and AI. Precision medicine is highly dependent on machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, and other techniques to provide proof, effectiveness, as well as cost efficiency in a patient-centered world. So precision medicine can allow us to embrace and switch from empirical practices to evidence-based, to even a very targeted, to almost the target of one, leveraging machine learning and AI, as well as how patients now can interact with connected technologies. So for example, using patient strat and pre-symptomatic predictive modeling, we can separate potential responders from non-responders, which could make clinical trials shorter, targeted to the right patient at the right time in the right therapeutic treatment. And so we can also use machine learning and natural language processing to search the literature for biomarker analysis that can help us develop targeted therapies as well as define new clinical endpoints. So while AI is still nascent in healthcare, certain technologies show great promise. And we're going to touch on each one of these things briefly. I'm going to use a specific example, but if that example doesn't quite resonate for you, feel free to come up and ask more specific questions so that we can make this as relevant for your stay here as possible. So we're going to talk a little bit about computer vision, natural language processing, virtual agents, IoT, Internet of Things and connected devices, machine learning and deep learning, process automation, and predictive and prescriptive analyses. Now, there are a ton of challenges, which you probably have been hearing about, are well aware of, think about all the time, in privacy, ethics, and security, not just around the security of the data, but also is current informed consent sufficient enough in this space? Accuracy. we're going to be talking mostly about techniques and approaches that augment human interaction, do not replace. Disease taxonomy, our current disease taxonomy, is not always as precise as machines need it to be. Research into viability of the scale and protocols needed to be able to make sure that we can execute in against safety and efficacy guidelines. Data, tons of it, lots of it, sometimes helpful, sometimes noise. Standards and guidelines, our current standards and guidelines do not necessarily cover everything we would like to see when it comes to using AI. There's regulatory challenges. There's the expectation that AI might do more than it may possibly do, or the reverse, that it cannot do certain things that we can rely on and trust, which is probably the biggest thing, in my opinion, on this list. So we're going to pretend that we've solved all these problems so that we can actually think about using the techniques and not get caught up in all the challenges that we know are there. And we know that if we're dedicated enough to want to use this type of technology to advance patient care, that we can do it. So when we think about clinical research, AI has an applicability across the entire life cycle, from pre-study to closeout. Whether it's looking at real-world evidence in designing protocols and study design, we're looking at literature, for using social media for recruiting patients. That way we can have faster identification and maybe using predictive analytics to talk about risk. I'm really quantifying risk in maybe a different way than we do today. Digital tools for screening and randomization, electronic supply chain, which I think is something that maybe we don't always think about from an AI perspective, but we'll look at that. So we can have faster startups, we can be more efficient, and we can actually reduce costs. Wearables, near real-time data, being able to leverage different techniques to allow us to leverage technology that other industries use regularly, or consumer-grade technology, technology that consumers are used to using in their everyday life, so adoption of those as part of perhaps their treatment options may be easier for them to use, so that we can maybe do a little bit different way of predicting compliance and adherence. So we can also look at early data trends that we're seeing. If we have continuous feed data, we can look at patient responses, patient experiences in a different way than just every time they come and visit. And then certainly speeding up analysis and electronic submission, so that we can also have faster and more transparent access to data. So let's talk about, we're going to dive right into use cases, because that's, I'm hoping, why you're here. Natural language processing. So looking at unstructured data and text. Imagine a scenario where either a physician or a patient or a researcher wants to ask questions of content, whether that content comes from papers, whether that content comes from clinical protocols, whether that content comes from labels on a drug. They just want to ask their question the way they want to ask. They can type it, they can talk it. They should be able to ask that question in a way so that the software and the tools and the technology breaks it down into component parts that gives them, the requester, information in context to the question they're asking. And they can get that information in a voice response. They could get it in a mobile app. They can get it in a way that makes the most sense to them. Again, incorporating some consumer-grade technology so the consumers feel comfortable, and also not leaving this out as a standalone. Integrating it perhaps in conversations they're having with their providers, conversations they're having with their clinical team, to be able to actually make sure that this is not a once and done and a standalone. So we're going to talk a little bit more about things on the right-hand side you see in the phone. Namely, a concept of a clinical virtual agent. Now, clinical virtual agents can be device-driven tools where that conversation or that search or that information is just one-to-one. I ask a question of my device, it gives me some answer. I ask Siri for directions, it gives me an answer. But imagine a world where this is bigger than that, where this is a knowledge and integration tool, where a patient is going through their clinical trial, for example, and they're asking questions, and they have questions, and that content is there for the agent perhaps to answer, but at the same time, the physician or the clinical team knows what they're asking, knows what they're struggling with, knows that information as well. It becomes a tool that they can work together in so that nobody's existing in a vacuum, no one's getting information that they're not discussing with their primary and their care team. It's something that they can go home and work with on their own, but at the same time stay connected. Imagine if you could use something like this to ensure that maybe patients don't always have to come to an office to get some feedback. The physician doesn't always have to see you in order to see you, because this is the kind of ways that we can reduce costs but still increase or keep the same standard of care that we want, but not necessarily have everything to be physical face-to-face, that we can use virtual face-to-face, and that can be used in a clinical setting, in a physician's office, or at home where the patient is. Computer vision. Computer vision has a lot of promise in a lot of different areas in healthcare. And so I'll remind you that if you bring a photo, your favorite photo, to the Blue Prism Avanade booth, we'll give you a demo of some fun of using that, some computer vision technology. But computer vision can be used, for example, in looking at scans, looking at MRI and other types of radiology, to be able to look at things faster than maybe perhaps then certainly a human can. And actually then again, not living in isolation. Share this information with fellow researchers to say, and annotate things to say, the machine found this, we should be talking about it. These are the ways that, that we may be able to process information faster. Think about things from a telemedicine perspective. If someone doesn't have access to specialists, but they can have scans taken and interact with specialists in another part of the country, another part of the world, you can now think about ways that we can open medicine up in a true sense of making sure that everybody has the same access to care, and it's trackable and measurable, and also available on as many devices as need to be. And also part of the, perhaps that clinical virtual agent. None of these technologies need to be used independently. I think we've found that they make a lot more sense when you use them together and use them in various ways to be able to advance the goals of patient care. Some of the things we don't think about sometimes is because it's all behind the scenes. Warehouse safety, right? We can use computer vision to look at what's happening in our supply chain. When is that machine safe to use? When are people in a zone they're not supposed to be? Emotional responses. When is someone tiring? Someone driving a forklift in a warehouse of your samples crashes into something. Could that have been prevented? Is there video evidence if you're audited and you need to take the FDA or regulatory body through your warehouse? Can you prove everything that's going on in there? So computer vision can help with that as well. Safety, and also any type of unauthorized access, so people can't come and go when you don't know about it. We've also used drones to do warehouse inventory. It's kind of fun. They can fly at night. They're very little. They don't get in the way. But humans can turn inventory maybe twice a year to do the entire warehouse, and they're very accurate. But if you have a large facility, you could probably get a daily turn using drones, so that you do not, there's loss prevention, there's risk reduction, and there's just a knowledge of where everything is in the warehouse. Process automation. This is probably one of the easiest places to start. Process automation covers a very wide variety of techniques that move from rules-based, very rigid, very specific trees of analyses, to judgment-based, where you're actually starting to put more human interaction into this. and moving from tactical to transforming your business. But starting with automating tasks that are repeated and repetitive, where your teams actually would prefer something automated, reduces errors, does not actually replace human beings in any way, but actually creates repetitive processes that can be automated to reduce and reduce costs and also increase time. To move to more cognitive services where we're integrating decision making inside that automation. Part of also virtual agents, because I'm automating some of the data return that I'm getting and some of the data storage so that these things are all integrated together. To eventually trying to find ways to use real artificial intelligence to mimic what human beings might do in those situations. Sounds far-fetched, but if we can move some of these things along a continuum, it's not an all or nothing, right? We can move from the simpler automation to the more complex. And really, automation fits within the clinical life cycle. From, putting together study design and protocols to site selection and doing all the back-end work to be able to analyze a particular site or investigators, to doing materials and ordering, to invoicing. Things that have to be done, are very mundane, and actually, if they could be automated, probably would reduce error. So that you're ready for patient enrollment. And then during the study, it's managing supply, doing clinical coordination, doing data collection, incident reporting. No one likes to do those things. It's a lot easier if they could be automated. And then to helping out with the biostats, doing reports, having tables and graphs automatically inserted into reports, archival and manuscript, the creation of the, all the electronic support for submission to the final approval and commercialization. So everything has a potential for automation. So for example, the one thing that automation promises us is consistency, reliability, and the ability to ensure that change is always managed. And that we can have a very immutable history for any kind of report creation, audit trails, anything that allows us to make sure that we can track and change all the things. It can be very simple. A lot of the tools, such as Blue Prism, that we're out there at the booth with, these things are very easy to use, very user-friendly, use constructs that we're all used to using, that there's not a lot of technology need to be able to do this so that the platform manages all of this for you. Okay. IoT. IoT is pretty mature and used a lot in logistics and component tracking. But you can imagine clinical supplies, products being tracked, lot numbers from the initial start of where those things happen, either in a factory or a pilot plant or somewhere to be able to get materials, say, from your facility or warehouse to clinical sites around the world. Everything can be tracked. Teams can be monitoring everything in their locations. Packages removal, every movement across the globe can be tracked. So there's no reason to not know where something is. And if there is any problems or errors, to be able to catch them before it goes downstream so that you're not trying to figure out later where how something happened. Same thing around quality control. We can also use AI for preventative maintenance. So if something does break, or if we do, we actually think about predictive maintenance to make sure that we're predicting that certain things may fail at some point in time, so that there's never plants and warehouses not working, there's not a plant that's down, there's no shortage of drugs, and that we're really keeping on top of all this stuff from both a quality and reliability perspective of our supply chain. Wearables, right? We have watches, we have smart things, we're used to using them, patients and consumers are used to uploading stats. This is not a new world in using that type of technology. And an interesting way to think about perhaps monitoring patients when they're not necessarily always in a physician's office. We can track certainly the things that the wrist can measure, but think about wearables on other parts of the body. Glasses that can actually help with diagnosing disease and other activities, and other monitors that can be placed on the body. If you could know that a patient is struggling with something before they actually had an opportunity to go see a physician, could we signal them to be able to say that this is something that's worth a visit, or is it something that I can that the physician or study team can actually talk to the patient about through their virtual agent because they've noticed something? Can we reduce the amount of times that someone needs to come in an office just to monitor vitals if we have access to all the vitals? So think about a really extended use of something like this to keep people healthier, to not wait until they've missed 6 doses of something before you notice blood sugars going up and other kinds of things. Consumers, we're all used to wearing devices. So I think the education of having those in the marketplace has already been done. So we should be taking advantage of them. Predictive analytics. There's a continuum of analytics, just to kind of ground everybody in concepts. Descriptive analytics, right? Talking about what happened in the past, diagnostics, why did it happen and understanding why. And then you start building into the realm between predictive, prescriptive, and cognitive, where AI and machine learning start to come into place. And we start to think about what will happen next. Can I predict patient adherence? Can I predict treatment completion? Can I predict patient responders or non-responders? What can I do with the data that we have in order to do predictive information? One of the things that healthcare doesn't always use, that other industries have found very helpful, is polling patients for their attitudes, beliefs, and intent, and other behavioral analytics that can make some of the study of the hard data a lot more nuanced and really can help with things like adherence. People don't always forget. They intentionally don't take certain treatments. Why? And understanding that with the other aspects of the harder data to be able to do predictive. And so we might be able to predict, for example, what patients might respond to particular treatments. What has been done in the past? What are their markers? All done before we set up a trial, right? We actually lay it all out and say, what is the predictive nature of something? What are the markers? What does a patient need to present? What have they done in the past? What are the inclusion and exclusion criteria? And kind of run the trial in a predictive algorithmic way before we ever get to doing it paper. Could reduce costs, could target patients faster. We can do micro trials to get things to market faster. A lot of different ways we can use different analytics. So what's next? Kind of the things we start seeing for our future, not necessarily so far off. Extended reality to improve compliance and explain treatments. Imagine putting a VR helmet on and being able to walk through what your treatment's going to be like, or what's going to happen to you before surgery, or what's going to happen through the next 6 months of being, say, in a trial, or a year. And being able to show people everything from needle sticks to giving blood to everything that they may be involved in, what it'll look like going forward, so that they can actually understand, not in words, not in giving them pamphlets, not in phone calls, but actually in a type of virtual reality that really brings everything to life. Can be transparent and continuous data. Think about if all of the devices, if talking through virtual agents and getting patients to use tools that are trackable and traceable, we can start looking at the concept of continuous data and really looking at making decisions with our patients in real time, because we know the data that's there. It should reduce the amount of times we're chasing patients. It should reduce things escalating out of control, because we've already have all that information and we can take actions on that. Experiences. I know we focus when we do research, and even when we're thinking about patient therapies, about the endpoint for the patient. And we think about, okay, if they take this treatment, if they're in this thing, we're talking about cures for diseases or some level of endpoint. But the experience is equally important. What's that patient going to go through from the time that we first enroll them, for example, in a trial, through the entire process, from the time they're diagnosed with the disease through their lifetime? Those experiences shape response, clinical response, as well as patient response, their behavior, the reasons they choose to stay in therapy and not. Those experiences are very important, and AI can help understand what a patient is going through, what they're feeling, how they're reacting, what they're doing, what they're not doing, how they're interacting with caregivers, how they're interacting with their physicians. We can also use it for collecting data. Every time there's a situation, every search, every reaction on a wearable, every part of it, adherence, all of that is data that can be used and captured automatically without typing anything in or capturing it in a more manual way. And then eventually, which I'm sure there's tons of skepticism on, eventually there'll be trial by algorithm. There will not be patients in clinical trials for certain things. They can be done completely with AI, completely simulated in a way that it's that it's precision-based, genetically driven, using individualized predictive modeling, so we really can have a trial of one, because I can do it all on paper, or at least on machines. And that will require global standards, global findings, sampling that crosses geographies, a lot of things that we still need to work on a lot today. And I'm out of time. And this is my last slide. Yes, sir.
First question is, so let's say that we have really good AI tools
Mm-hmm.
which we want to use in patient actually recruitment for Alzheimer's in one health system. So in order to meet it in the health system, whenever you come with new product, you need to do clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
Identify the risk, the harm, so then what would be the process of using AI, which everybody considers an AI tool as a clinical trial subject, to use for the clinical trial setting? How is it possible?
Okay, that's a pretty compound question. Help me break that down a little bit. So I've got a patient with Alzheimer's or some particular disease. I have a novel new treatment. Is that what you're saying?
So that's a clinical trial in Alzheimer's. Yeah.
Okay.
Then you come up with really good, actually patient recruitment AI tool. Yeah. So that product doesn't have it's AI. Yeah. It's not a like rule engine type of product. It has prognostic actually value. So and you want to implement in the health system in a couple of hospitals to recruit the
Patient
for that, let's say they want to do something like clinical trial in Alzheimer's. They want to recruit they want to use for that patient.
I would
How is it possible?
I would think that one of the ways you could start with that is predicting who that population might be that could be used for recruitment. What do they need to look like? What are the markers they need to have? What are all the things you do with inclusion and exclusion criteria, but algorithmically.
Yeah, I know that.
So, I mean, that's the first start, is trying to identify your patient pool.
But you're not allowed to actually put it in the health system, yeah? Because that product also needs to be registered as a clinical trial, and then we need to actually identify all the risks of anything comes with that AI tool.
But you do that anyway, right? We do that now. We do that manually, right? Before you even think about running a trial with a particular compound, you think you have to do phase 1, you have to do phase 2. You still have to do that work. If you could do some of that work algorithmically, right, you would make smarter choices in your phase 1. you would could make different choices in your phase 2. By the time you got to phase 3, you should have could have more information than you had before to know whether or not I'm even going to proceed. So even if you're just using AI to get you to a better starting point for phase 3, that would be less expensive, shorter time. All the things that you can do groundwork algorithmically so that by the time you're predicting safety and efficacy, that when you get there, you should have more information. And very targeted. Are there, I just recently did a lot of work in Hep C, where there's a lot of genetically differences in the types and the responses of patients. We haven't done a lot of that heavy lifting in Alzheimer's, of whether or not there are markers and indicators and things we could know in advance so that we knew what patient population has the best ability to respond. We could do that now without interfering with the current clinical trial process at all. Thank you. Sorry.